The bitter Montana wind cut through Clara's threadbare shawl as she stood outside the boarding house, her few possessions bundled in a worn carpet bag. Mrs. Henderson, the proprietress, remained unmoved by the tears freezing on Clara's cheeks. "I've given you 3 weeks' grace already," the older woman said, her voice as cold as the November morning. "Find somewhere else for you and that boy. This ain't no charity house." Clara clutched Samuel's small hand tighter, her 8-year-old brother pressed against her side, his thin body shaking with more than cold. The coughing that had plagued him for weeks rattled in his chest again. "Please, Mrs. Henderson, just until I find work." The door slammed shut with finality. Clara stood there, the weight of their situation crushing down on her shoulders. 22 years old, widowed for 6 months, orphaned since childhood, and now homeless in a mining town that offered little mercy to those without means. Tom's death in that cave-in had taken more than her husband. It had stolen their future, their security, everything. "Clara," Samuel's voice was small, scared. "Where are we gonna go?" She forced a smile, kneeling to adjust his coat, Tom's old one. Cut down and still too big. "We'll find something. Sweet boy, don't you worry." But worry gnawed at her insides like a starved wolf. The few coins left in her purse wouldn't buy them shelter for even one night. Pride had kept her from begging, but pride wouldn't keep Samuel warm or fed. They wandered through Copper Creek's muddy streets, past the saloons already rowdy despite the early hour, past the general store where credit was a distant memory, past the church where whispers followed them like shadows. The good women of town had made their position clear: a young widow should remarry quickly or leave. Clara had done neither, clinging to independence and Tom's memory with equal desperation. By noon, exhaustion forced them to rest on the wooden steps of the abandoned assay office. Samuel's cough had worsened, each hack making Clara's heart clench. She pulled him close, sharing what little warmth her body could offer. "Well now, this ain't no place for sitting." Clara looked up to find a man standing before them, his broad frame blocking the weak sun. He was perhaps 30, with dark hair that needed cutting and clothes that marked him as a minor canvas pants, heavy boots, flannel shirt rolled to the elbows despite the cold. His face was weathered but not unkind, with gray eyes that seemed to take in their situation at a glance. "We're just resting," Clara said, struggling to her feet and pulling Samuel up. "We'll move along." "Wasn't asking you to." The stranger's voice held a peculiar note. Not quite sympathy, but something close. He studied Samuel's pale face and the way the boy swayed on his feet. "Boy's sick." "He's fine." The lie came automatically. Clara had learned to guard their vulnerabilities. The man's expression suggested he wasn't fooled. He reached into his pocket, and Clara tensed. But he only pulled out a silver dollar. "There's a woman runs a food tent behind the Golden Dollar Saloon. Tell her Elias sent you. She'll give you hot stew and won't ask questions." Before Clara could refuse or thank him, he'd pressed the coin into her palm and walked away, his long stride carrying him toward the mining supplies store. "Who was that man?" Samuel asked, staring after him. "I don't know," Clara admitted, looking at the dollar like it might disappear. Pride warred with necessity, and necessity won. "But we're going to get you some hot food." The stew was everything the stranger Elias had promised, thick with potatoes and carrots, with chunks of meat Clara didn't examine too closely. Samuel ate like he hadn't seen food in days, which wasn't far from truth. The tent's owner, a tough-looking woman named Rosie, lived up to her reputation for not asking questions, though her eyes lingered on their obvious desperation. Fed and warmed, they faced the approaching night with renewed dread. Clara had asked at every establishment that might hire a woman, but Copper Creek offered limited option saloon work she wouldn't consider. Laundry work already filled by Chinese immigrants who worked for less than she could afford to, or the cribs behind Main Street where painted women plied their trade. As darkness fell, They huddled in an alley between two buildings, somewhat sheltered from the wind. Clara wrapped Samuel in everything they owned, holding him as his fever climbed and his breathing grew labored. "I'm cold, Clara," he whimpered. "I know. Sweet boy, try to sleep." But sleep wouldn't come for either of them. The temperature plummeted, and Clara knew with terrible certainty that they wouldn't survive the night like this. She'd have to swallow what remained of her pride. Go to the church, throw herself on Reverend Morrison's mercy, despite his disapproval of her stubborn widowhood. She was gathering strength to move when footsteps crunched in the alley's entrance. Fear spiked through her alone at night. She was vulnerable to more than cold. But the figure that appeared was familiar, the broad shoulders, the unhurried gait. Elias Turner stood there with a lantern, its light casting shadows across his weathered features. "Figured I'd find you somewhere like this." His voice held no judgment, just a kind of weary understanding. "That boy needs proper shelter and a doctor." "We're fine," Clara began, but Samuel's harsh coughing cut her off. "No, you ain't." Elias moved closer, and Clara saw something in his face that looked like old pain. "I got a cabin about 2 miles out, near my claim. It ain't fancy, but it's warm and dry. You and the boy can stay till you figure something else." Clara stared at him. "I don't even know you." "Name's Elias Turner. I mine the Fortuna claim up Crystal Creek. Been here 3 years. Keep to myself mostly. And before you ask, I ain't looking for nothing improper. Just can't stand by and watch a boy freeze when I got room to spare." Perhaps it was exhaustion, or desperation, or something in his steady gray eyes that inspired trust. Or maybe it was simply that she had no other choice. Samuel's breathing was getting worse, rattling like dried beans in a gourd. "All right," she whispered. Elias nodded, then surprised her by scooping Samuel up like he weighed nothing. The boy barely stirred, too fevered to protest a stranger's arms. "Got a wagon at the livery. You look ready to drop yourself." The ride to his cabin passed in a blur of jolting wheels and Samuel's labored breathing. Clara dozed despite herself, jerked awake each time by fear that this was a mistake, that she was putting them in worse danger. But Elias drove steady and silent, his presence oddly reassuring. The cabin, when they reached it, was exactly what he'd promised, nothing fancy but solid, with a good stone chimney already sending smoke into the star-filled sky. Inside was sparse but clean, a main room with a cook stove and table, a curtained alcove with a bed, and a ladder to what must be a loft. "Put the boy here," Elias said, indicating the bed. He'd already built up the fire, and warmth was spreading through the room. "I'll ride for Doc Hutchins." "I can't pay a doctor," Clara said miserably. "Didn't ask you to." He was already heading for the door. "There's water heating on the stove, clean rags in that chest. Try to get his fever down." Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with her sick brother in a stranger's home. She should have been terrified. Instead, for the first time in months, she felt something like hope. She bathed Samuel's burning face, coaxed water between his cracked lips, and prayed like she hadn't since Tom died. The cabin was simple, but spoke of a methodical man, tools hung neat on pegs, dishes clean on shelves, everything in its place. No photographs, no mementos, nothing to say who Elias Turner was beyond a miner who lived alone. When hoofbeats announced their return, Samuel was no better but no worse. Doc Hutchins, a gruff man with gentle hands, examined the boy with professional efficiency. "Lung fever," he pronounced. "Needs rest, warmth, and this medicine 3 times a day." He produced a brown bottle from his bag. "Boy's lucky. Another night in the cold would have done for him." Clara clutched the bottle like salvation itself. "Thank you. I'll find a way to pay." "Already settled," the doctor said, glancing at Elias, who stood silent by the door. "Just follow my instructions. I'll check back in a few days." After he left, Clara found herself alone with their benefactor. Elias moved to the stove, busying himself with the coffee pot. "Why?" she asked finally. Why help us?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Had a brother once, younger than your boy. Fever took him while I was away fighting the war. Always wondered if someone could have helped, would have made a difference." He poured 2 cups, handed her one. "Can't change the past, but I can offer a roof when it's needed." The coffee was strong, bitter, perfect. Clara wrapped her hands around the hot tin cup and felt tears threaten for the first time all day. Kindness, after so much hardship, was harder to bear than cruelty. "We won't stay long," she managed. "Just until Samuel's better, until I can find work." Elias nodded. "Stay as long as needed. I'm at the mine most days. You and the boy won't bother me none." He climbed the ladder to the loft, leaving her to keep vigil beside Samuel. As she listened to her brother's breathing slowly ease, watched firelight dance on the rough-hewn walls, Clara allowed herself to believe they might survive after all. Outside, wind howled through the Montana mountains, but inside Elias Turner's cabin, for the first night in longer than she could remember, they were warm. The morning sun slanted through the cabin window, illuminating dust motes that danced above Samuel's sleeping form. For 3 days now, Clara had maintained her vigil, watching the fever break and return, following Doc Hutchins' instructions with religious devotion. The brown bottle of medicine was already half empty, but Samuel's breathing came easier, and his sleep seemed more peaceful. Clara rose stiffly from the chair beside the bed, her body protesting the long hours of sitting. Elias had already left for his claim. She'd heard him moving about before dawn, trying to be quiet but unable to mask the solid tread of his boots on the plank floor. He'd left coffee warming on the stove and fresh bread on the table, as he had each morning since they'd arrived. She stepped outside to fetch water from the creek, breathing deeply of the crisp mountain air. The cabin sat in a small clearing, surrounded by pine and aspen, with a view down the valley toward Copper Creek. It was isolated but not lonely, peaceful in a way that soothed her frayed nerves. "You fixing to stay out here forever?" Clara spun around to find a woman on horseback watching her. She was perhaps 40, with steel-gray hair and a face that had seen its share of hardship but remained handsome. Her riding skirt and practical jacket marked her as someone who didn't much care for fashion. "I'm Margaret Sullivan," the woman said, dismounting with practiced ease. "Run the dry goods store in town. Heard Elias Turner had taken in a widow and her sick boy." Clara's stomach tightened, so the gossip had already started. "I'm Clara Dawson. My brother Samuel has been ill. Mr. Turner was kind enough to offer shelter." Margaret's sharp eyes took in Clara's worn dress, the dark circles under her eyes, the defensive set to her shoulders. "Kind. Was he? That's a word don't often get applied to Elias Turner. Man's been living out here alone for 3 years. Barely speaks 10 words on his supply runs to town." "He saved our lives," Clara said simply. "Maybe so." Margaret studied her for another long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "I brought some things, boys' clothes that my grandson outgrew, and such. Heard yours was about 8 or 9. She moved to her saddlebags and pulled out a wrapped bundle. Clara's pride warred with Samuel's needs for exactly 2 seconds before needs 1. "Thank you," she said, accepting the bundle. "I'll pay you back when—" "No need." Margaret's voice softened slightly. "Lost my own husband in a mine accident 5 years back. Know what it's like to be alone with young ones to care for, though I had the store, which makes a difference." They stood awkwardly for a moment before Margaret added, "You looking for work?" "Yes." The word came out more desperately than Clara intended. "But I've asked everywhere in town. What can you do?" "I can read and write, do figures. I kept the books for my husband's—" Clara's voice caught. "I can sew, cook, clean, whatever's needed." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "Can't offer you anything at the store, barely making ends meet as it is, but there might be something." She paused, seeming to weigh her words. "You know Jake Morrison runs the Golden Dollar." Clara's heart sank. The saloon. "I won't," Not asking you to work the floor, Margaret interrupted. But Jake's been complaining about his books being a mess. Previous man who did them lit out for California goldfields. Jake can't read nor figure worth a damn. And he's getting cheated by suppliers. He's sure of it. Mike could use someone to straighten things out. Working for a saloon, even just keeping books, would cement her reputation as a fallen woman. But fallen women could feed their brothers. Would he hire a woman for such work? Jake's practical above all else. If you can save him money, he won't care if you're wearing petticoats or trousers. Margaret remounted her horse. Think on it. If you're interested, come see me at the store. I'll put in a word. After she left, Clara stood holding the bundle of clothes. Torn between gratitude and despair, every kindness seemed to come with a price, deeper obligation, further compromise. Another step away from the respectable life she'd once known. Samuel woke around noon, clear-eyed for the first time since the fever struck. "Clara, where are we?" "Someplace safe," she said, helping him sit up. "A kind man named Mr. Turner is letting us stay in his cabin while you get better." "Is he the big man who carried me?" "Yes." Samuel considered this. "I like him. He didn't bounce me around like the wagon did." Clara couldn't help but smile. Trust a child to judge a man by such simple criteria. She showed him the clothes Margaret had brought, watched his eyes light up at the warm flannel shirt and sturdy trousers. "Can I get up?" "Tomorrow. Maybe today you rest." They passed the afternoon quietly. Clara told him stories, helped him practice his letters on a slate Elias had produced from somewhere, and fed him the strengthening broth she'd made from the rabbit Elias had left that morning. It was near sunset when she heard horses approaching, multiple horses, moving fast. Fear spiked through her. She moved to the window, pushing aside the simple curtain to peer out. 3 men were dismounting in the yard. Even from here, she could smell the whiskey rolling off them. One, she recognized Cal Watson, who worked at the livery stable. The others were strangers, rough-looking men with the air of drifters. "Well, well," Cal said loudly. "Heard old Elias got himself a woman finally. About time he learned what that pecker's for, besides pissing." The others laughed, an ugly sound that made Clara's skin crawl. She moved quickly to the door, checking the latch. Solid. But 3 determined men could break it down easy enough. "Pretty widow, they say," one of the strangers added. "Living out here all cozy-like. Bet she's showing her gratitude real nice." "Come on out, honey," Cal called. "We brought whiskey to celebrate Elias's good fortune. Share and share alike. Ain't that the way?" Clara's hands shook as she looked around for a weapon. Elias's rifle hung on pegs by the door, but she'd never fired one. A heavy iron skillet on the stove would have to do. "Clara," Samuel's voice, thin with fear. "Stay in bed," she said firmly. "Cover your head with a blanket and don't come out no matter what." The men were getting bolder, coming closer to the door. One rattled the latch. "Don't be unfriendly now. We just want to meet Elias's new woman." "I've got a sick child in here," Clara called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "You need to leave." "Sick child," Cal laughed. "That what he's calling it now?" The door shook under a heavy blow. Clara gripped the skillet tighter, positioning herself between the door and Samuel's bed. Another blow, and the latch started to give. That's when she heard it, the distinctive click of a rifle being cocked. "Step away from my door." Elias's voice, cold as mountain stone. Clara had never been so glad to hear anyone speak. "Now, Elias." Cal started, but his voice had lost its swagger. "We was just coming to visit, friendly-like. Get on your horses and ride out. Don't come back." No call to be. The rifle shot split the air. Clara heard the men scramble, heard Cal curse. "That was your one warning." Elias said, "Next one won't go into the ground." Horses whinnied. Boots scrambled in dirt. And within moments, the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Clara's knees nearly buckled with relief. You can open the door now, Mrs. Dawson." She did, finding Elias standing in the yard with his rifle still raised, watching the dust settle from the fleeing riders. His face was granite hard, his gray eyes cold as winter ice. "You all right, the boy?" "We're fine." Her voice shook only a little. "They didn't get in." He finally lowered the rifle, turning to look at her. Something in his expression softened slightly. "They won't be back, but word's out you're here. There'll be talk." "There's already talk." Clara lifted her chin. "Mrs. Sullivan visited today." "Margaret's good people." He moved past her into the cabin, checking on Samuel, who peered out from under his blanket with wide eyes. "How you feeling, boy?" "Better, sir. Was those bad men?" "Just drunk fools. Nothing to worry on." Elias hung his rifle back on its pegs, then turned to Clara. "This changes things. Town's got the wrong idea about the situation here." "I know." Clara set the skillet back on the stove with trembling hands. "I'll start looking for other arrangements tomorrow. We've imposed enough." "That ain't what I meant." He ran a hand through his dark hair, looking uncomfortable. "You're welcome here long as needed, but maybe I should sleep in the barn, for propriety's sake." The barn was little more than a lean-to, barely fit for the horses. Clara felt a flash of anger at the town, at those men, at the unfairness of a world where kindness was twisted into something ugly. "You'll do no such thing," she said firmly. "This is your home. We're the intruders. If anyone should—" "Nobody's sleeping in the barn." Elias interrupted. "We're all staying put. Let them talk." He moved to the stove, checking the coffee pot like nothing had happened. "You consider what Margaret said about the bookkeeping job." Clara blinked at the change of subject. Yes, I'm considering it." "Jake Morrison's a hard man, but fair. Keeps his saloon girls safe. Doesn't water his whiskey over much. You could do worse." "Working for a saloon would ruin what's left of my reputation." Elias poured 2 cups of coffee, handed her one. "Reputation don't feed hungry boys." It was so close to her own earlier thought that Clara almost smiled. "No, it doesn't. I could put in a word. Jake owes me a favor or two." "Why?" Clara found herself asking again. "Why do you keep helping us?" He was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee. "Maybe I got tired of being alone. Maybe I figured doing right by you and the boy balances some old debts. Or maybe I just can't stand to see waste, and that's what it be. You and Samuel freezing in an alley when there's warmth to spare here. Most people aren't so generous with their warmth." "Most people got more to lose than I do." He drained his cup, set it aside. "I'll ride to town in the morning. Talk to Jake. You think on whether you want me to." The rest of the evening passed quietly. Elias made dinner venison stew that filled the cabin with savory smells. Samuel managed to eat a full bowl and keep it down, a victory that made Clara's eyes sting with grateful tears. They sat by the fire afterward, Elias whittling while Clara mended one of Samuel's torn shirts with thread from her precious small supply. It was almost peaceful, almost like a real home. Dangerous thinking, Clara warned herself. This was temporary shelter, nothing more. The bruised flower of hope trying to bloom in her chest needed to be crushed before it grew roots. But when Samuel asked Elias to tell a story, and the big man obliged with a tale about tracking a bear through spring snow, Clara let herself pretend, just for a moment, that this was her life, this warm cabin, this quiet man, this sense of safety she'd thought lost forever. Tomorrow would bring back reality. Tonight, she'd allow herself this fragile peace. The job at the Golden Dollar had been Clara's salvation and her shame for 3 weeks now. Each morning, she left Samuel in the cabin he was strong enough to manage alone for a few hours and made the journey to town. Each evening, she returned with coins in her pocket and fresh gossip ringing in her ears. "That woman's got no shame," she'd overheard Mrs. Potter saying to her friends outside the millinery shop. "Living with that hermit, working at a saloon. What example is that for the boy?" Clara had kept walking. Head high, the weight of the ledger books in her basket a reminder that gossip didn't pay doctors or buy medicine. Jake Morrison had been skeptical at first, but when she'd found over $50 in bookkeeping errors in her first week alone, he'd become her staunchest defender, at least within the saloon walls. "Don't you pay them biddies no mind," he'd growled when she'd arrived one morning with eyes red from tears she wouldn't admit to shedding. "They got nothing better to do than flap their gums about matters that ain't their business." The work itself was satisfying. Clara had always had a head for figures, and bringing order to Jake's chaotic records gave her a sense of purpose she'd lacked since Tom's death. She worked in a small office behind the main saloon, separated from the drinking and carousing by a thick door Jake kept locked from her side. But it was at the cabin where she found unexpected peace. Elias maintained a careful distance, respectful of her space while somehow always being there when needed. He'd built Samuel a proper bed in the main room, taught him to whittle, and never complained when the boy followed him around asking endless questions about mining, horses, and the war. "Was you really a soldier, Mr. Elias?" Samuel asked one evening as they sat by the fire.
"I was."
Elias's hands never paused in their whittling. "Did you shoot lots of Confederate soldiers?"
"Samuel,"
Clara admonished, but Elias held up a hand. "Fair question from a boy." He was quiet for a moment. "I did what I had to do. Ain't proud of it, ain't ashamed neither. War's an ugly business, and I was glad to see the end of it. My PA died in a mine," Samuel offered. "Clara says he was brave." "I'm sure he was." Elias's gray eyes found Clara's across the fire. "Takes a brave man to go underground every day, knowing the mountain might decide to keep him." That night, after Samuel slept, Clara found herself lingering by the fire instead of retreating to her curtained corner. Elias was working on what looked like a toy horse, the wood taking shape under his patient hands. "Christmas is coming," he said by way of explanation. "Figured the boy might like it." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." His voice held that particular tone she'd come to recognize, the one that said the subject was closed. "How's the job treating you?" "Well enough. Jake's suppliers have been cheating him blind for months." He was quite vocal about it when I showed him the numbers. A small smile tugged at Elias's mouth. "I'll bet he was. Jake's got a voice like a bull moose when he's riled." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Clara found herself studying him in the firelight, the strong lines of his face, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he bent to his work, the careful precision of his scarred hands. He was handsome in a rough way, she realized with a start. Not like Tom, who'd been boyish and quick to smile, but in a solid, enduring way that suited the mountains. "You ever think about remarrying?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Elias's hand stilled. "What brought that on?" Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. "I'm sorry, that was presumptuous." "No, it's all right," he resumed whittling, but slower now, thoughtful. "Had a girl once, before the war, Sarah, pretty little thing, sweet as honey. Wrote me faithfully for 2 years. Then the letter stopped. Found out later she'd married a shopkeeper who hadn't gone off to fight. Can't say I blamed her." "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "Long time ago. What about you? Tom's been gone 6 months now." "Everyone seems to think I should have remarried already," Clara said bitterly, as if a husband is something you replace like a broken pot. Grief don't follow nobody's timeline but its own. His understanding loosened something in her chest. "I loved Tom. He was a good man, kind and steady, but—" She hesitated, then plunged ahead. "But sometimes I wonder if I loved him, or just the safety he represented. Is that terrible?" "Nothing terrible about being honest with yourself." Elias set aside the half-carved horse, giving her his full attention. "World's hard on a woman alone. Nothing wrong with wanting security. The other women in town think I'm—" Clara couldn't finish the sentence. "I know what they think." His voice hardened. "They're wrong." "Are they? I'm living in your home, taking your charity. You're earning your keep and then some." Elias interrupted. You cook, clean, keep the place running smooth. And Samuel, well, having him around reminds me there's still good in the world. That ain't charity. Clara, that's an exchange. Fair and square. The use of her given name sent an unexpected shiver through her. He'd been scrupulously formal until now. Always Mrs. Dawson or ma'am. I should check on Samuel, she said, standing abruptly. Clara, her name again, stopping her in her tracks. You got nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing. She fled to Samuel's bedside, her heart racing for reasons she didn't want to examine. The boy slept peacefully, his breathing clear and easy. Health had returned to his cheeks, and he'd even gained some weight thanks to regular meals. Whatever else came of their time here, Elias had saved Samuel's life. That debt could never be repaid. Thunder woke her near midnight. Not the distant rumble of a mountain storm, but a sharp crack directly overhead. Lightning illuminated the cabin for an instant, showing rain already streaming down the windows. Storm came up fast. Elias's voice from the main room. She heard him moving around, checking the shutters. Could be a bad one. Clara rose, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. Samuel had awakened too, sitting up in bed with wide eyes. She went to comfort him as another thunderclap shook the cabin. Just a storm, sweet boy. We're safe inside. But Elias was frowning at the door. Wind's picking up something fierce. I better check the animals. He was reaching for his coat when they heard it a groaning, splintering crash from outside. Elias yanked open the door, and rain slashed in like cold knives. Through the darkness, Clara glimpsed devastation. The lean-to barn had collapsed, its roof caved in by a massive pine tree. Elias plunged out into the storm without hesitation. Clara could hear the horses screaming, trapped under the debris. She grabbed the lantern, following him despite the rain that soaked through her nightgown in seconds. Get back inside, Elias shouted over the wind. But she was already there, holding the lantern high so he could see. Together they worked to shift the splintered boards, fighting against the wind that tried to tear everything from their grasp. One horse had broken free and stood trembling in the rain. The other was pinned, a beam across its hindquarters. Elias strained against the beam while Clara soothed the terrified animal, rain streaming down her face. On 3, Elias called, 1, 2. Lightning struck nearby, the thunder instantaneous and deafening. The horse surged in panic just as Elias heaved the beam aside. The animal scrambled up and bolted into the darkness. The supplies. Clara pointed to what had been the storage corner of the barn. Sacks of grain were already soaking through, tools scattered in the mud. Without those supplies, winter would be brutal. They worked side by side, salvaging what they could. Clara's hands were numb with cold, her gown plastered to her skin, but she didn't stop. Sack after sack, tool after tool, they ferried to the cabin's porch. Elias's face was grim in the lantern light, and she knew he was calculating the loss not just in supplies, but in the time and money to rebuild. The wind gusted harder, and another tree cracked ominously. Inside, now, Elias commanded, and this time Clara didn't argue. They stumbled through the door just as another pine crashed down where they'd been standing. They stood in the cabin, dripping and shaking. Samuel huddled in his bed, tears on his cheeks. Is everything gone? No, boy. Elias's voice was steady despite his exhaustion. We saved most of it. Just got to dry things out and build new shelter for the horses. Clara became aware of how she must look, nightgown clinging, hair streaming, but Elias wasn't looking at her body. His eyes were on her face, and something in his expression made her breath catch. You didn't have to come out, he said quietly. Could have stayed warm and dry inside. You needed help. Most would have let me handle it alone. I'm not most people. No, he agreed, his voice rough. You're not. They stood there, rain still pounding the roof. Something shifting in the air between them, Then Clara shivered, breaking the spell, and Elias turned away. "Get into dry clothes before you catch your death. I'll stoke up the fire." Clara retreated behind her curtain, peeling off the soaked nightgown with shaking hands. As she dressed, she could hear Elias moving around, building up the fire, murmuring reassurances to Samuel. When she emerged, he'd laid out blankets by the hearth and was making coffee. "Tomorrow we'll see what can be salvaged," he said, handing her a cup. "Might lose some grain, but the tools should be all right once they're dried and oiled." "I'll help rebuild," Clara said. "I'm stronger than I look." "I know you are." There was something in his voice, a warmth that hadn't been there before. "Saw that tonight." They sat by the fire as the storm raged outside. Samuel had fallen back asleep, exhausted by the excitement. Clara found herself shoulder to shoulder with Elias, sharing warmth and silence. "Thank you," he said suddenly, "for coming out to help. Been handling things alone so long. I'd forgotten what it was like to have someone." He trailed off. "Someone what?" "Someone who stays when trouble comes instead of running from it." Clara thought of Sarah, the girl who'd chosen a shopkeeper over a soldier, of all the people who'd turned away when she'd needed help, of how Elias had been the only one to offer shelter without conditions. "I'm not going anywhere," she said quietly. "Not until you tell me to." His hand found hers in the darkness, rough and warm and steady. "Then I reckon you'll be here a good long while." Outside, the storm began to ease, but inside the cabin, something new had taken root, fragile as spring grass but just as determined to grow. The afternoon sun slanted through the pines, dappling the creek with golden light. Clara had come down to wash clothes, taking advantage of the unseasonably warm December day. Samuel was in town with Margaret Sullivan, who'd offered to take him for peppermint sticks while she ran errands. It was the first time Clara had been truly alone at the homestead. She hummed as she worked, scrubbing Elias's work shirts against the washboard. The past week since the storm had seen a shift in their careful dance around each other. Small touches his hand on her elbow to steady her, her fingers brushing his when she served dinner. Conversations that stretched later into the night, the way his eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking. The sound of whistling made her look up. Elias was returning early from the mine, his tall figure moving through the trees with easy grace. He hadn't seen her yet, his path taking him to a deeper pool upstream where he often washed after work. Clara meant to call out, to let him know she was there, but something held her tongue, perhaps the peace of the afternoon, perhaps curiosity about his routine when he thought himself alone. She watched as he set his tools on a flat rock, then began unbuttoning his shirt. She should look away. Any decent woman would look away. The shirt came off, revealing a broad back marked by scars, some old and white, others newer, pink against his sun-weathered skin. War wounds, she realized. He moved with unconscious efficiency, hanging the shirt on a branch before bending to remove his boots. Clara's hands stilled in the wash water. Her heart began a rapid rhythm that had nothing to do with shame and everything to do with the flecks of muscle under skin, the casual strength in every movement. When his hands went to his belt buckle, she made a small sound, surprise, alarm, something else entirely. Elias froze, then turned slowly. Their eyes met across the distance, and Clara felt heat flood her face. She waited for anger, for accusation. Instead, she saw something else flash across his features, surprise giving way to an awareness that matched her own. "Clara," her name was rough on his lips. "I was washing," she said unnecessarily, gesturing at the forgotten laundry. "I didn't mean to. That is, I should have—" "It's all right." He made no move to cover himself or retrieve his shirt. "Creek belongs to everybody." They stared at each other for a long moment. Clara became acutely aware of how she must look, sleeves rolled up, hair escaping from its pins, face flushed from work and sun, and this terrible, wonderful tension crackling between them. "You should finish your bath," she managed.
The water must be cold.
Been bathing in cold creeks for years. His voice held a note she'd never heard before. Something dark and promising. But maybe you're right. Wouldn't want to shock your sensibilities.
My sensibilities,
Clara repeated, surprising herself with a laugh.
Mr. Turner, I've been widowed, homeless, and working in a saloon. I'm not sure I have any sensibilities left to shock. Don't say that.
He took a step closer, apparently forgetting his state of undress.
You're a lady. Clara, circumstances don't change that. A lady wouldn't be standing here, she whispered. A lady would have announced herself the moment you arrived. A lady wouldn't be wondering.
Wondering what? The question hung between them like morning mist. Clara's gaze dropped despite herself, taking in the broad chest, the flat stomach, the way his work-worn trousers hung low on narrow hips. When she looked up, Elias's eyes had darkened to storm cloud gray.
You should go, he said, but it sounded more like plea than command.
Yes, she agreed, not moving.
Clara.
A warning now.
I know. Still, she stayed rooted to the spot, caught by something stronger than propriety. It's just, I've been so cold for so long. Elias, not just my body, but inside, frozen since Tom died, maybe longer. And when you look at me like that...
Like what?
The words were barely audible over the creek's babble. Like I'm not just a burden or a charity case. Like I'm not just a widow with too much pride and nowhere to go. Like I'm... beautiful. He said it simply, stated fact rather than flattery. Strong. Brave enough to stand in a storm to save what matters. Kind enough to make a lonely man remember why he bothers getting up each morning. Clara's vision blurred. Don't say things you don't mean.
I don't say anything I don't mean.
He retrieved his shirt then, breaking the spell, though his movements were jerky.
But I won't take advantage. You're under my protection, living in my home. I won't have you feeling obligated or thinking you owe me something you're not free to give.
And if I'm free to give it? The words escaped before wisdom could stop them. Elias stilled in the act of buttoning his shirt. Then I'd ask if you knew what you were saying, if you understood that I'm not Tom, not some nice town boy with clean hands and simple dreams. I've done things, seen things, got more shadows than light in me. We all have shadows, Clara said softly. Doesn't mean we have to live in them forever. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, stopping just close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, smell the honest sweat and pine soap that clung to him. His hand rose, hesitated, then gently tucked an escaped strand of hair behind her ear.
You're killing me, woman, he said roughly. Standing there with the sun in your hair and those eyes looking at me like I might be worth something after all.
You are worth something. You're worth everything. Clara caught his hand, held it against her cheek. You saved us. Elias, not just from the cold, but from despair. You gave us hope when I'd forgotten what that felt like. That's gratitude talking. No. She turned her face to press a kiss to his palm, felt him shudder. That's my heart talking. Gratitude is what I feel for Jake Morrison giving me work, for Margaret bringing clothes. This is something else entirely. Clara, I dream about you, she confessed in a rush. Wake up listening for your footsteps. Find excuses to mend your clothes just to hold something that's touched your skin. If that makes me wanton, then so be it. I'm tired of being frozen. His control broke, his free hand tangled in her hair, pins scattering as he tilted her face up. You don't know what you're asking. Then show me. Their lips met, and Clara understood what wildfire meant. This was nothing like Tom's gentle pecks, nothing like the chaste affection of her marriage. This was hunger and need and months of careful distance exploding into desperate contact. Elias kissed like he did everything else with focused intensity and complete commitment. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara felt as though the world had shifted on its axis.
Everything looked the same, the creek still bubbled. The sun still slanted through the trees, but everything was different. "We should get back," Elias said, though his hands remained framed around her face. "Samuel will be home soon." "Yes." She didn't move. "Clara." "I know." This time she did step back, bending to gather the forgotten washing. Her hands trembled as she wrung out the shirts. "Elias, what happens now?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I don't know, but I know I can't go back to pretending I don't want you. Don't want this, you and Samuel, and something I ain't got words for." "A family," Clara supplied softly. "The word you're looking for is family." "Yeah," his voice was wondering. "Reckon that's it." They walked back to the cabin in silence. But it was a different silence than before, charged with possibility rather than careful distance. Clara's lips still tingled from his kiss. Her skin still burned where he'd touched her. At the porch, Elias caught her arm. "I meant what I said. I won't take advantage. You got choices, Clara. Always. This don't go nowhere you don't want it to." "I know." She met his eyes squarely. "That's why I trust you. That's why—" She took a breath. "That's why I'm falling in love with you." Before he could respond, the sound of wagon wheels announced Samuel's return. Clara smoothed her hair, trying to locate the scattered pins, while Elias quickly tucked in his shirt. By the time Margaret's wagon pulled up, they'd managed to look almost normal. "We had the best time," Samuel tumbled out, clutching a paper bag of candy. "Mrs. Sullivan let me help sort buttons at the store, and I met a boy named Henry who has a dog. And—" he paused, looking between them with the uncanny perception of children. "Did something happen?" "Just washing day," Clara said, holding up the basket of wet clothes. "Did you remember to thank Mrs. Sullivan?" As Samuel chattered about his afternoon and Margaret drove away with knowing looks, Clara felt Elias's presence behind her like a flame at her back. Everything had changed by the creek. The careful walls they'd built were crumbling, and she didn't know whether to be terrified or exhilarated. That night, as she lay behind her curtain listening to Elias's restless movements in the loft above, Clara pressed her fingers to her lips and remembered the taste of him, the solid strength of his body, the way he'd looked at her like she was precious and dangerous all at once. She'd been frozen for so long. Now, with winter closing in around them, she was finally starting to thaw. The question was whether either of them would survive the spring flood that was sure to follow. The week following their encounter at the creek passed in a dance of stolen glances and careful distances. Clara went about her daily routines, cooking, mending, tending to Samuel, but every movement felt charged with new awareness. When Elias handed her firewood, their fingers would brush and linger. When she served his supper, he'd catch her wrist gently, just for a moment, his thumb tracing the delicate bones before releasing her. Samuel, observant as ever, noticed the change. "Why do you and Mr. Elias look at each other funny now?" he asked one evening as Clara tucked him into bed. "We don't look at each other funny," Clara said, smoothing his hair. "Yes, you do. Like how Mrs. Sullivan looks at the peppermint sticks before she remembers she's not supposed to eat sweets." Out of the mouths of babes, Clara kissed his forehead. "Go to sleep, sweet boy." But sleep eluded her that night, as it had every night since the creek. She lay behind her curtain, listening to Elias moving about in the loft above, wondering if he was as restless as she. The kiss haunted her not with regret, but with wanting. She'd been married, yes, but this feeling was entirely new. With Tom, affection had been comfortable, expected, mild. This was fire barely banked, threatening to consume everything in its path. The next morning brought trouble in the form of Reverend Morrison at their door. Clara's stomach dropped when she saw him through the window, tall, austere, with eyes that had judged and found her wanting since Tom's funeral. "Reverend," she greeted, not inviting him in. "Mrs. Dawson," His gaze swept the cabin's interior, no doubt cataloging sins. I've come to discuss your situation. My situation is my own business. When it affects the moral fabric of our community, it becomes everyone's business. He pushed past her, uninvited. Living here with an unmarried man, working in a saloon, what example are you setting for your brother? A surviving one. Elias's voice came from behind her. He'd entered silently, now stood close enough that she felt his warmth at her back. Morning, Reverend, coffee. I'm not here for refreshments. Turner? Morrison's face pinched with distaste. I'm here to offer Mrs. Dawson a respectable alternative. The church has gathered funds to send her and the boy to San Francisco. There's a Methodist home there for widows and orphans. We're not orphans, Samuel piped up from his bed. Clara takes care of me just fine. Children should be seen, not heard. Morrison snapped. In my house, children can speak their minds. Elias said mildly, but Clara heard the steel underneath. Same goes for anyone else under my roof. Your house. Yes, that's the problem, isn't it? Morrison turned back to Clara. Surely you can see how this appears. A young widow, still attractive, living with a bachelor people talk. Mrs. Dawson. Your reputation. My reputation was worthless the day it wouldn't buy Samuel medicine. Clara interrupted. Where was the church's charity when we were sleeping in alleys? Where were you when my brother was burning with fever? That's different. No, it's not. She lifted her chin. Mr. Turner offered help without conditions, without judgment. That's more Christian charity than I've seen from actual Christians. Morrison's face darkened. You're making a mistake, young woman. When he tires of you, when you're left with nothing but shame and perhaps worse. That's enough. Elias stepped around Clara, placing himself between her and the Reverend. You've said your piece. Door's that way. I'm trying to save her soul. Her soul ain't yours to save. Elias's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Now, you can walk out, or I can help you. Your choice. Morrison looked between them, his mouth working soundlessly. Finally, he straightened his coat. I'll pray for you both, especially you, Mrs. Dawson. Pride goeth before a fall. After he left, Clara found herself shaking. Elias's hands settled on her shoulders, gentle but grounding. You all right? They all think I'm... She couldn't finish. They think wrong. He turned her to face him. You're the strongest, bravest woman I know. Don't let that crow make you doubt it. What if he's right? What if this is a mistake? Do you think it's a mistake? Clara looked into his steady gray eyes and found her answer. No. Then, to hell with Morrison and anyone else who says different. His hands cupped her face. Clara, I got something to say, and I want you to hear it clear. I ain't playing games here. This isn't some passing fancy or convenience. You mean something to me. You and Samuel both. Elias. Let me finish. His thumb stroked her cheekbones. I know I ain't much. Got a small claim, a half-built cabin, and more past than future. But what I've got is yours if you want it. All of it. Forever. If you'll have me. Clara's heart stopped, then resumed at double pace. Are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm asking if you'd consider making this arrangement permanent, legal, before God and man and even that pompous reverend. A smile tugged at his mouth. I'm asking if you'll marry me. Clara Dawson. The world tilted. Marriage. Not someday. Not after a proper courtship. But now. People will say I trapped you. That I planned this. People say a lot of things. Doesn't make them true. We've known each other barely a month. I knew the first night. His voice was certain. When you looked at me over Samuel's sickbed, ready to fight the whole world for that boy, I knew you were different. Special. Worth waiting for. Worth fighting for.
I don't love you the way I love Tom, Clara said, needing to be honest.
Good. I don't want you to... Elias pulled her closer. Love me the way you love me. That's enough. More than enough.
Clara thought of all the reasons to say no. The gossip would be terrible. People would assume the worst. She'd be marrying a man she barely knew, binding her future to his rough hands and quiet ways. Then she thought of how those hands had built Samuel a bed, carved him toys, saved their lives. How his quiet ways included leaving her flowers by the wash basin, making coffee just how she liked it, reading to Samuel when the boy couldn't sleep, how he looked at her like she hung the moon, but never pushed, never demanded.
Yes, she whispered.
Elias blinked.
Yes.
Yes, I'll marry you. Stronger now. Certain. But I have conditions. His laugh was shaky with relief.
Name them.
We wait until after Christmas. I won't have Samuel's holiday overshadowed.
Fair enough.
I keep working at the Golden Dollar until we've saved enough to get through winter. If that's what you want. And she took a breath. We do this proper, in church, with witnesses. I won't have anyone saying we're ashamed.
Wouldn't have it any other way.
He sealed the promise with a kiss that left her breathless.
Are you getting married?
Samuel's excited voice broke them apart. The boy was sitting up in bed, eyes bright. Does that mean Mr. Elias will be my brother now?
More like a father, Elias corrected gently, if that's all right with you.
Samuel considered this seriously.
Pa died, but you're not him.
No, I'm not.
Good. I don't want another Pa. I want you.
Simple as that. Samuel settled it.
Can I call you Elias instead of Mr.?
You can call me whatever feels right. Clara felt tears prick her eyes as her brother scrambled out of bed to hug Elias. The big man lifted him easily, and Samuel wrapped thin arms around his neck with complete trust. This was what she'd wanted since Tom died, not just shelter, but home. Not just protection, but family. That evening, as news spread through Copper Creek like wildfire, Clara helped Elias with the evening chores. They worked in companionable silence, feeding horses, checking supplies, preparing for the winter that pressed closer each day.
Regrets? Elias asked as they finished.
No, Clara smiled. Well, maybe one. His face fell.
What?
I wish I'd said yes the first night. Would have saved us all this dancing around each other.
His laugh echoed off the mountains, rich and full.
Woman, you're going to be the death of me. That's the plan, she agreed, standing on tiptoes to kiss him. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled warmly. Samuel was practicing his letters at the table, tongue poking out in concentration. It was a simple scene, domestic and ordinary, but to Clara it looked like everything she'd never dared dream of.
I love you,
she said suddenly, the words surprising her with their truth. Not like Tom. You were right about that. This is different, bigger, like the difference between a candle and a forge fire. Elias pulled her against him, his chin resting on her head. I love you too. Have since you stood in my doorway, half frozen and still ready to fight for your boy. Going to love you till they put me in the ground. And probably after. Outside, snow began to fall. The first real storm of winter, but inside the cabin, wrapped in Elias's arms with Samuel humming over his letters, Clara felt nothing but warmth. Let the gossips talk. Let Reverend Morrison disapprove. She'd found something worth more than reputation. She'd found home. The day started like any other December morning, crisp, clear, with fresh snow blanketing the ground. Clara was preparing breakfast while Elias checked his mining equipment and Samuel practiced writing his name in the frost on the window. The date for their wedding was set for 3 days after Christmas, and despite the gossip in town, Clara felt nothing but anticipation. That peace shattered with the sound of approaching horses, many horses, moving fast. Elias heard them too, his head snapping up from examining his pickaxe. Their eyes met through the window, and Clara saw her own alarm reflected there. Nobody rode that hard in fresh snow without bad purpose. "Samuel, get under the bed," Clara ordered, her voice sharp with urgency. "But Clara, now." The boy scrambled to obey as Elias burst through the door, reaching for his rifle. "Stay inside. Bar the door behind me." "Like hell," Clara muttered, but he was already gone. 5 men sat their horses in the yard, and Clara's heart sank as she recognized them. Rex Donnelly and his crew claimed jumpers who'd been run out of 3 mining camps for their violent ways. Rex himself was a bear of a man with cold blue eyes and scarred knuckles that spoke of countless brawls. "Morning, Turner," Rex called, friendly as a snake. "Fine piece of land you got here." "It's spoken for." Elias stood easy, but Clara saw the tension in his shoulders. "As you well know." "Funny thing about claims." Rex dismounted, his men following suit. "Sometimes the paperwork gets lost. Sometimes the owner has an accident. Sometimes things just change. Nothing's changing here." "See, that's where you're wrong." Rex's smile was all teeth. "Been watching you, Turner. Saw you pull some nice color out of that creek last month. Figure a claim that rich deserves better than one man working it alone." "I'm not alone." "No, you got yourself a woman and her brat." Rex's eyes found Clara in the window, and his smile widened. "Pretty little thing. Bet she keeps you warm at night." "Watch your mouth," Elias warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Or what you'll take on 5 men, Rex laughed. "You always were too proud for your own good. Turner, time someone taught you different." It happened fast. Rex nodded to his men, and they spread out, trying to flank Elias. But Clara had Tom's old revolver in her hand before she'd even made the conscious decision to get it. She eased the door open, staying behind cover. "That's far enough," she called out, the gun steady in her grip. The men froze, suddenly realizing Elias wasn't as alone as they'd thought. "Well, well." Rex's eyes glittered with something ugly. "Ladies got teeth." "Ladies got bullets," Clara corrected. 6 of them. 5 of you. I like those odds." "You won't shoot. Women don't." The shot cracked through the morning air, Rex's hat flying off his head. Clara had already cocked the hammer again before the echo faded. "That was your only warning," she said, surprised by how calm she sounded. Inside, her heart hammered like a trapped bird. "Next one goes center mass." "You crazy!" One of Rex's men started forward. Elias's rifle spoke this time, kicking up snow at the man's feet. "Lady said that was your only warning. I'd listen if I were you." For a moment, nobody moved. Clara could hear Samuel whimpering under the bed, could feel the cold seeping through her thin dress, could taste copper fear on her tongue, but her hand stayed steady. "This ain't over," Rex snarled, but he was already backing toward his horse. "You can't watch her every minute. Turner, accidents happen, especially to women who don't know their place. You come near her or the boy, and what happens next won't be no accident." Elias promised. "That's not a threat, Donnelly. That's a guarantee." They mounted up, Rex grabbing his ruined hat from the snow. As they rode off, he looked back once, and the promise in his eyes made Clara shiver. Once they were gone, her hands began to shake. The revolver suddenly weighed 100 pounds. Elias was beside her in an instant, gently taking the gun, pulling her against him. "You did good," he murmured into her hair. "Real good." "I shot at a man." The reality of it hit her like cold water. "I could have killed him. But you didn't. You shot to warn, not to kill. That takes control." He pulled back to look at her face. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" "Tom taught me, before we were married. Said a woman should know how to protect herself." Tears threatened. "I never thought I'd need to." "Hey." Elias's thumb wiped away an escaped tear. "You protected us, all of us. I'm proud of you." Samuel crawled out from under the bed and flew to them.
attaching himself to Clara's skirts. Were those bad men going to hurt us? Not anymore, Elias said firmly, but over Samuel's head. His eyes met Clara's. They both knew this wasn't over. Men like Rex Donnelly didn't forgive being humiliated, especially by a woman. The rest of the day passed intense watchfulness. Elias didn't go to the mine, instead working close to the cabin, reinforcing the shutters and checking their ammunition. Clara went about her usual tasks, but the revolver stayed within reach. That night, after Samuel slept, they sat by the fire planning. Maybe the Reverend was right, Clara said quietly. Maybe I should take Samuel and go to San Francisco. Is that what you want? No. The word came fierce and immediate. This is our home. You're our family. But if staying puts you in danger... I was in danger before you came. Elias interrupted. Any man with a producing claim is... Difference is... Now I got something worth fighting for. Rex will come back. Probably. With more men. Maybe. Clara wanted to shake him. Doesn't that worry you? What worries me, Elias said slowly, is the thought of you and Samuel somewhere I can't protect you. What worries me is living the rest of my life wondering where you are. If you're safe, if you're happy. Donnelly's just a man. I've faced worse. In the war, he nodded. And after, mining camps attract hard men. Clara, I've held my claim for 3 years because I'm harder when I need to be. But today, he took her hands. Today you showed me I'm not alone in that. You stood with me. Do you know what that means? Tell me. Means I'm not just fighting for myself anymore. Means when Donnelly comes back, and he will, he's not facing one man defending a claim. He's facing a family defending their home. That changes everything. Clara squeezed his hands. I'm scared. Good. Fear keeps you sharp, but don't let it drive you away. We're stronger together than apart. A log shifted in the fire, sending up sparks. Clara watched them rise and disappear, thinking about strength and fear and the price of belonging somewhere. Teach me, she said suddenly, to shoot better. I mean, if I'm going to defend our home, I want to do it right. Something flickered in Elias's eyes, pride, maybe, or relief. Tomorrow, he promised. We'll start tomorrow. They prepared for bed with their usual routines, but Clara noticed Elias placed his rifle closer to hand, and she kept Tom's revolver on the small table beside her bed. The cabin that had felt so safe now seemed fragile, vulnerable to the darkness pressing against the windows. Clara Samuel's voice, small in the dark. Are you awake? Yes, sweet boy. I'm glad you shot that man's hat. He was mean. Despite everything, Clara smiled. Go to sleep, Samuel. Everything's all right. I know. We got Elias, and you got a gun. We're safe. Such simple faith. Clara envied it even as she vowed to make it true. They were a family now, not by blood, or even yet by law, but by choice and circumstance and the bonds forged in crisis. Donnelly and his kind had threatened that, tried to tear it apart. They'd failed. Today. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Rex would regroup, plan, possibly return with more men and worse intentions. Winter pressed closer. Supplies would run low, and the gossips in town would have fresh fodder for their whispers. But tonight, in this cabin with these people she'd come to love, Clara felt fierce and determined and ready. Let them come. She'd stood in a doorway and defended her home once today. She'd do it again tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until men like Rex Donnelly learned that some things weren't worth the price of taking. Outside, snow began to fall again, muffling the world in white silence. Inside, 3 souls slept or pretended to, each knowing that their quiet life had irrevocably changed. The test had come, and they'd passed it. But the real trial was yet to come. The blizzard struck on Christmas Eve with a fury that seemed personal. Wind howled like wolves around the cabin. and snow fell so thick that Clara couldn't see the woodpile just 10 feet from the door. They'd been preparing for winter, but nothing could have prepared them for this. "It's like the sky's angry," Samuel said, pressing his nose to the window. "Just weather," Elias assured him. Though Clara caught the concern in his eyes, a storm this fierce could last days, and their supplies, while adequate for normal winter, might not stretch if they were truly snowed in. By evening, the temperature had plummeted so drastically that ice formed on the inside of the windows. They'd moved Samuel's bed closer to the fire and hung every blanket they owned around it to create a warm cocoon. Clara prepared a simple Christmas Eve dinner rabbit stew and the last of their preserved vegetables, trying to maintain normalcy despite the storm's rage. "Tell the Christmas story," Samuel requested as they ate. So Elias told it, his deep voice somehow making the familiar tale fresh. Clara watched him in the firelight, this man who'd become their anchor, and felt her heart swell with love that still surprised her with its intensity. They'd just finished eating when they heard it a pounding on the door that wasn't wind. Elias was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "Who's there?" "Please," a voice, cracked with cold. "My boy, please help." Clara recognized that voice. Her stomach dropped even as she moved toward the door. "That's Martha Henderson, the same woman who'd thrown them out, who'd shown no mercy when they'd needed it most." Elias looked at Clara, a question in his eyes. She could say no, turn away as they'd been turned away. Instead, she nodded. Elias unbarred the door, and Martha Henderson practically fell inside, carrying a bundle that Clara realized was a child, not far behind her. Old Jacob Morse from the neighboring claim stumbled in, supporting Mrs. Patterson, the baker's widow. "Storm caught us on the road back from town," Jacob gasped out. "Horses bolted. Been walking for hours. Saw your light." Martha's son Henry. Clara remembered. Maybe 6 years old, was blue with cold, barely conscious. Without hesitation, Clara took him from his mother's arms. "Get those wet clothes off him," she ordered, already moving toward the fire. "Elias, we need more blankets. Samuel, heat some water." They worked with the efficiency of crisis. Soon 5 people were crowded into their small cabin, wet clothes drying by the fire, hot coffee and soup warming frozen bodies. Henry lay between Clara and his mother near the hearth, color slowly returning to his small face. "Thank you," Martha whispered, tears making tracks down her weathered face. "I know I don't deserve—" "Hush," Clara said firmly. "No one deserves to freeze, especially not on Christmas Eve." As the wind howled outside, their unexpected guests shared what had happened. The storm had come up fast while they were returning from Christmas service in town, when their wagon had overturned in a drift. They'd had no choice but to seek shelter. "Couldn't see nothing," Jacob said, still shaking despite the warmth. "Thought we were done for. Then like a miracle, your light." Elias had been checking their supplies quietly. Now he met Clara's eyes with a message she understood. 5 extra people for who knew how long. It would be tight, more than tight. But when she looked at little Henry, now sleeping peacefully, and Martha's grateful tears, Clara knew they'd manage. They'd have to— "You'll stay until it's safe to travel," she announced. "We'll make room." The sleeping arrangements were creative. Martha and Henry took Clara's curtained corner. Mrs. Patterson shared Samuel's bed, the boy happily camping on a pallet by the fire. Jacob took the floor near the door, insisting he'd slept in worse places. Clara and Elias would take turns keeping watch and tending the fire. As the others settled for the night, Martha caught Clara's arm. "Why?" she asked simply. "After what I did?" Clara thought of cold nights and closed doors, of pride that filled no stomachs and righteousness that gave no warmth. "Because mercy isn't about deserving," she said finally. "It's about needing." Martha's face crumpled. "I'm so sorry. For everything, I was wrong, so wrong about you." Clara squeezed her hand. "It's Christmas Eve,"
Time for new beginnings. The night passed slowly. Elias and Clara took shifts, keeping the fire fed, checking on their guests. During her watch, Clara found herself beside the frost-covered window, looking out at the white fury beyond the glass. "Can't sleep," Elias's voice, soft behind her. "Just thinking." He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, then his arms around that. About circles, how things come round. 2 months ago, I was the one desperate for shelter. And now you're the one giving it. "We're giving it," she corrected. "This is your home." "Our home," he said firmly. "In 3 days, it'll be official. But it's been ours since the night you walked through that door." They stood together, watching the storm, drawing strength from each other's presence. Around them, people slept, people who judged them, scorned them, gossiped about them. Now those same people slept under their roof, safe from the killing cold, recipients of the mercy they'd once denied. Christmas morning dawned still and white. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed. Drifts reached halfway up the windows, and the silence after so much wind seemed almost holy. Samuel woke first, his gasp of delight waking the others. It's Christmas and the sun's out. Despite their crowded quarters and dwindling supplies, a festive mood took hold. Clara made flapjacks with the last of their flour, stretching it with melted snow and prayers. Mrs. Patterson, recovered from her ordeal, helped with breakfast, her skilled hands making the simple meal special. "We should try to dig out," Jacob suggested, looking at the buried door. "Town'll be worried." After breakfast, Elias said, "Storm like that, everybody'll be digging out. No one's going anywhere for a while." They were just finishing eating when Henry tugged at Clara's sleeve. "Mrs. Clara is Santa Claus. Coming here." Clara's heart sank. In all the chaos, Christmas presents were the last thing on anyone's mind, but before she could form a gentle explanation, Elias stood. "Reckon he already came," he said, winking at Clara. "But he had to leave things in the barn on account of the storm. Samuel, want to help me check?" The 2 boys bundled up eagerly. While they were gone, Clara turned to find Martha watching her with wonder. "Your man," Martha said softly. "He's not what people say." "No," Clara agreed. "He's not." "Neither are you." Martha's voice broke. "I said terrible things, thought terrible things, and you took us in without hesitation. Anyone would have—" "No, Mrs. Patterson interrupted. "They wouldn't have. I know I wouldn't have. God forgive me." When Elias and the boys returned, they bore treasures the wooden horse Elias had been carving for Samuel, now finished and beautiful. For Henry, miraculously, a small carved dog that Elias must have made in his spare time. How had he known? But that was Elias always watching, always preparing. Santa knew I'd be here. Henry's joy was radiant. The day passed in unexpected harmony. Jacob and Elias worked to clear a path to the woodpile and check on the horses. The women mended clothes and told stories. The children played with their new toys, their laughter bright as bells. As evening approached, Jacob fashioned snowshoes from branches and rope. "I'll make it to town," he announced. "Let folks know we're all right. Bring back help." "Be careful," Elias warned. "Drifts can be treacherous." "I'll send supplies back with whoever comes," Jacob promised. He paused at the door, looking around the cramped but warm cabin. "You know, I had you figured wrong. Turner, both of you. Town's had a lot to say about this arrangement. None of it Christian. But what I've seen here, this is what Christian charity really looks like." After he left, a different kind of peace settled over the cabin. Mrs. Patterson taught the boys a clapping game while Martha helped Clara with dinner preparations. "I'll make this right," Martha said quietly as they worked. "When we get back to town, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of people you really are. How you saved us." "We don't need saving," Clara replied, "Just understanding." "Then you'll have that too." That night, as their guests slept and snow began falling gently again, Elias and Clara sat by the dying fire. "Eventful Christmas," he murmured. "The best kind," Clara replied, meaning it. "Do you know what you gave me today?" "What's that?" "The chance to show mercy where none was shown. To be better than my hurts. That's a gift worth more than gold." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You humble me. Clara Dawson, soon-to-be Turner. Every day, you humble me." Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside, warmth prevailed not just from the fire, but from hearts opened and prejudices melted. Tomorrow would bring rescue parties and returns to normal life. The gossips would have new fuel, but this time it would be different. This time, the story would be of kindness repaid, mercy extended, and love that sheltered all who needed it. 3 days until their wedding. 3 days until their unconventional family became official. But sitting there in their crowded cabin, surrounded by former judges turned grateful guests, Clara knew they were already everything that mattered. They were home. Spring arrived in Montana like a shy bride, hesitant at first, then bursting forth with wild abandon. The snow melted from the mountainsides, revealing carpets of wildflowers that painted the meadows in purple, yellow, and white. Clara stood on the porch of what was now truly her home, watching Samuel chase butterflies through the grass, his laughter carrying on the warm breeze. 3 months had passed since their wedding, a ceremony that had packed the little church despite the December cold. Martha Henderson had kept her promise, and the story of that Christmas Eve had transformed Clara and Elias from outcasts to reluctant heroes in Copper Creek's collective mind. Even Reverend Morrison had performed the ceremony with something approaching grace, though Clara suspected Martha's influential tongue had more to do with that than any change of heart. Wool gathering again. Elias's arms encircled her from behind, his chin coming to rest on her head. "Just thinking how different everything is from last winter." "Better different?" She turned in his arms, studying the face that had become as familiar as her own reflection. The harsh lines had softened some, and he smiled more readily now Samuel's doing as much as hers. "The best different," she assured him. The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Jake Morrison rode up, his usually gruff face split by a grin. "Got news," he called out, dismounting with surprising agility for his bulk. "Rex Donnelly and his crew got themselves arrested over in Helena. Killed a man in a card game. They'll hang for certain." Clara felt a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying lift from her shoulders. The threat that had shadowed their happiness was gone. "That's good news indeed," Elias said, his arm tightening around Clara. Jake's grin widened. "That ain't the only news. That investment opportunity I mentioned, the hotel partnership. My partners agreed we want you both in on it. Your bookkeeping skills, Clara, and Elias's level head could use both in the business." It was an opportunity they'd hardly dared hope for a chance at steady income beyond the uncertain yield of gold mining. Clara looked at Elias, seeing her own excitement reflected in his eyes. "We'll think on it," Elias said, but his smile gave away his answer. After Jake left, they walked hand in hand to the creek where so much had changed between them. The water ran high with snowmelt, chattering over rocks with springtime enthusiasm. "Remember when you found me here?" Clara asked, color rising in her cheeks. "Remember, woman. That image is burned into my brain till the day I die." Elias pulled her close. "Thought I was dreaming. Beautiful woman looking at me like I was something worth seeing." "You were. You are." She stood on tiptoes to kiss him. "You gave us everything. Elias, a home, a family, a future." "No," he corrected softly. "We built it together. You, me, and Samuel. That's what family does." Clara Elias Samuel's voice carried across the meadow. "Come quick, I found something." They found him by the old garden plot.
pointing excitedly at green shoots pushing through the dark earth. "The seeds we planted, they're growing." Clara knelt beside him, touching the delicate leaves with wonder. She'd planted them on a hope and prayer, not really believing anything would come of it. But here was proof that even in the hardest ground, with enough care and patience, life found a way. "We'll have vegetables come summer," she said, blinking back tears. "Our own food from our own land." "And flowers," Samuel added, pointing to another section. "The pretty ones for the table." That evening, as they sat down to dinner in their cabin, no longer Elias's cabin, but theirs, truly theirs, Clara looked around the table, Samuel chattering about his day, Elias listening with patient interest, the simple meal made special by being shared. This was what she'd dreamed of in those dark days after Tom's death, though she'd never dared believe it could come true. "What is it?" Elias asked, noticing her silence. "Just happy," she said simply. Later, after Samuel slept, they sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. The ring Elias had made, forged from that first piece of gold recovered after the storm, caught the moonlight on Clara's finger. "I've been thinking," Elias said slowly, "about Jake's offer, about the future, and I think it's time. The claim's played out mostly. Oh, there's still gold to be found, but not like before. Maybe it's time to build something different, something that doesn't depend on the mountain's mood." Clara heard what he wasn't saying, that he wanted to build something stable, something that would last for Samuel, maybe for children of their own someday. The thought sent a flutter through her stomach. "I think that's wise," she agreed. "Samuel's getting older. He should be in school proper, around other children." "We wouldn't have to leave here," Elias added quickly. "Just spend more time in town. This will always be home." Home. The word that had once meant loss and longing now meant peace and belonging. Clara leaned into her husband's warmth, feeling the solid presence of him like an anchor in a storm-tossed world. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Taking us in that night?" Elias was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Only regret I have is that it took so long to happen. Spent 3 years in these mountains thinking I was alive. Wasn't until you and Samuel came that I started living." "Elias Turner, you're going to make me cry." "Can't have that." He stood, pulling her up with him. "Come on, Mrs. Turner. Let's go inside." As they prepared for bed, Clara paused by Samuel's sleeping form, adjusting his blanket with gentle hands. The boy who'd been so frail and frightened just months ago now slept with the peace of absolute security, in sleep. She could still see the baby he'd been, the one she'd raised from infancy after their parents died. But she could also see hints of the man he'd become, strong and kind like Elias, resilient like her. "He's growing so fast," she murmured. "They do that," Elias agreed, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "But he's growing up good. You've done well by him." "We've done well by him," she corrected. In their bed, their marriage bed, still thrilling. After 3 months, Clara traced the scars on Elias's chest, each one a story of survival, of making it through to this moment. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "Love you back," he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "More than words can say." Outside, an owl called, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote answered. The sounds of the wilderness that had once frightened Clara now seemed like a lullaby, a reminder that they belonged here, in this wild, beautiful place. As sleep claimed her, Clara's last thought was a prayer of gratitude for Elias's kindness on that bitter November night, for Samuel's recovery, for Martha Henderson's change of heart, for storms weathered and springs arrived at, for love that came not as she'd expected, but exactly as she'd needed. The morning would bring new challenges. There was Jake's partnership to consider, a garden to tend, a little boy to raise into a good man. There might be more children someday. God willing, there would certainly be more storms. more tests, more chances to choose between fear and love. But tonight, in their cabin by the creek, with wildflowers blooming and stars wheeling overhead, Clara Turner knew one thing for certain: she was home, not just in a place, but in a life, in a love, in a future bright with possibility. And that was worth more than all the gold in Montana's mountains. The woman who'd stood at death's door with a sick child and no hope had become the woman who opened her door to enemies in need. The man who'd lived alone for 3 years had become a husband and father. The boy who'd nearly died had become the heart that bound them all together. In the Wild West, where death came easy and life came hard, they'd found something precious and lasting. They'd found family. They'd found love. They'd found home. And in the spring of 1869, in a cabin by Crystal Creek, that was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts about Clara and Elias's journey. If you enjoyed this Wild West love story, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Give this video a like, and don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover this tale of love, survival, and redemption in the American frontier.